Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on the top political stories of the day. I'm Frank Festa, and thanks for being with us. Today, I'm joined by Chaz Nuttycombe, the co-founder and director of the election forecasting website CAnalysis, to take a look ahead at some of the most competitive races he's watching this year at every level of government. Chaz is an undergraduate student at Virginia Tech, and he's been forecasting elections in his home state of Virginia since high school. CAnalysis's work has been sourced by major publications like the New York Times, The Atlantic, and ABC News, to name a few, and they've recently revamped their website to gear up for this year's elections. Chaz, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Frank.
Yeah, great to see you. How is your year going so far? Do you graduate this year?
It's going good. I'm about to finish up my undergrad and get my bachelor's degree in political science. Last semester, I had a really great time with the Virginia election. And right now, it's just another 18 credit semester and working on 2024 forecasts and whatnot.
Yeah, this has got to be a pretty crazy time of year for you, huh? You got to be excited.
Very much excited. But we are going to have, most of our, legislative forecast out before May. We're only launching forecasts after the filing deadlines have already occurred, so we know whether incumbents are running or not. So, it's still, a slog of, 18 credits and working on launching these forecasts and other projects going on.
Awesome. Well, lots of exciting stuff for us to get into, but Chaz, I wanted to give you a plug to start our show today. What's new and improved at CAnalysis this year?
So, we launched 4 years ago as of March 1st, which is kind of crazy to think about. That it's already been 4 years. We got a new homepage, or just not even just a homepage, but a new website, a new look developed by Which Side Digital, which did Mary Peltola's campaign and other projects they've also done. I was very impressed by their work with Mary Peltola's campaign. Quite frankly, it's the best work I've seen for a campaign with design, so I wanted to bring them on. We got a new website. We also have a new media kit and services that we do that's been updated. And we also have a new look for our forecast for the state legislative stuff, and then also a new version, a new model of the forecast. You have the kind of classic version, which only uses the ratings that I create, and then the more advanced version called the expanded version, which uses more quantitative data and polling, both presidential, and also if we're able to get internal polling or on both sides. And then, if there is public state legislative polling, we'll also be able to factor that into the forecast quantitatively. And, we also have our scorecards that show how well we've done in previous years, also on our site. New masthead showing you each member of our team. We are also working on launching the 2024 version of Bang for Your Buck, which tells people what the best places are for them to invest in state legislative elections are, regardless of party. That should be launching sometime this month or next month, I would say at the latest. So I'm really excited. We've been working on this since December.
Election forecasting is notoriously a tricky business to be in, especially in regard to the elections that have taken place in the last decade or so. But you yourself, Chaz, have an increasingly impressive track record. In Virginia's state-level elections last November, for example, you correctly predicted the winner of all 140 Senate and House races on the ballot in the state. That's 100% for our listeners who are as bad at math as I can be at times. But in the simplest terms, Chaz, what can you tell us about your methodology and how you arrive at your predictions?
So we're mixed method. I'm not a believer in one or the other. Something like Sabato's crystal ball, for example, at the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. And on that note, I'll also say go Hokies. But they use qualitative methodology, whereas something like 538 is quantitative. And, that's not to say that neither of those outlets are good. I love both of their work. But I believe that the best approach for forecasting elections is using both a qualitative and a quantitative approach. So that is our main approach when we decide how we want to forecast. But we generally use all the things that, an election forecaster would use for the presidency or the U.S. House or U.S. Senate, especially in this day and age. State legislative elections are increasingly polarized and nationalized. and more closely tied with the presidential results. So, incumbency or lack thereof, what was the actual election result in this previous district? How is this state and its districts trending? Campaign finance is something we look at qualitatively, even though it's quantitative, because campaign finance matters more in some states than others. And that's going to take time and research we don't have this year. And, looking at scandals or other sort of qualitative factors that may matter. For example, our biggest miss in 2022 was Hawaii's 44th House District, where Darius Keela is a Democrat who won a Trump district in Hawaii by 1 point. And I think a big reason for that was because he is a Pacific Islander, and it has the highest concentration of Pacific Islanders in any district in the Hawaii legislature. I had not been aware of this when I was doing my research. I track a lot of districts, so some stuff slips through the cracks. But yeah, so, we look at a whole bunch of numbers and other factors as well when making these forecasts.
Currently, when it comes to state legislatures, C-Analysis has Democrats favored to flip 44 seats nationwide and Republicans favored to flip 15. And C-Analysis also has a handful of chambers where you're expecting to see some pretty intense competition. I know you mentioned that both the House and the Senate are bound to be really competitive in Arizona before interviews, so maybe we can start our conversation there.
Yeah, our forecast is not up in Arizona. And, what I will say with an asterisk for the Arizona House forecast is going to be releasing, C-Analysis has never predicted before this year. We are getting into it this year. Multi-member district chambers on the district level. We have, cast chamber ratings for multi-member district chambers. But that's something that's going to be new this year. But I'm pretty confident in our Arizona Senate forecast that'll be out. I think the Republicans should be slight favorites in the chamber once it releases. But it could be a toss-up. It could be just like tilt Republican. I think at the most they would have like a 75% chance of holding their majority in the Senate. And then I'm not quite sure what it's going to be in the House. There are factors that we definitely have to wait until the filing deadline for, because in the Arizona House, both parties use what is known as the single bullet strategy. So each district has 2 members. But in some districts, in some of these swing districts, they'll only file one candidate to make sure they can just get one of those seats. I know that there is a majority Hispanic district in the Arizona House that the Republicans did that for. And, another one, the Phoenix suburbs that Democrats did. So, this is kind of why we have to wait for the filing deadline, especially for these multi-member district chambers for, releasing and creating these forecasts. I believe Arizona's is in April off the top of my head, but I don't quite remember. But regardless, once that filing deadline comes out, we will have a forecast out not long after that.
Other races that you mentioned as being interesting include Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Hampshire, Minnesota, and Alaska's houses, all of the House chambers in those states. Which of these are going to be the most competitive?
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania House is tilt Democratic in our classic model and lean Democratic in our advanced model, if I recall correctly. But, what I will say is that counts districts where there are not currently a Republican filed as a district that is uncontested Democratic, when in actuality there is a general election deadline that will be later. So, once that happens, you'll see Republican odds shoot up a little bit, but that's a pretty competitive chamber. And then the Michigan House is also going to be a highly competitive chamber. I think that's going to be probably a toss-up once the forecast comes out. The Democrats might be slight favorites, but we'll have to wait and see for that.
You alluded to this a few times in your answer just now, but say more if you can about the role redistricting is going to play in race competitiveness this year.
So the one I'm most excited about forecasting this year is the Wisconsin Assembly. This is a chamber that has been the most notoriously gerrymandered on a partisan level since 2010 during the Red Map program. And now it is a lean Republican chamber. The Democrats actually have a real shot at flipping the lower chamber for the first time in at least a decade, if not really more. I don't know what forecasts were looking like, if there were any in 2012 for, whether Democrats thought they could win the Wisconsin Assembly then. But they just passed a map that was drawn by Governor Evers. The Republicans are slight favorites in the forecast right now. It's lean Republican in the classic and then tilt Republican in the expanded version. But, the Democrats are going to have a double-digit net gain most likely in the Wisconsin Assembly regardless. Just based on the vastly different lines that are going on this year. And then next door, the Minnesota House should be decently competitive. I think once that forecast is out, it should be probably a tilt or a lean Democratic chamber. The Minnesota Senate and also the Michigan Senate are not up this year. They won't be up until 2026. And then, also Nevada is a little bit competitive. This is a chamber that was a little bit gerrymandered by the Democrats. I wouldn't say obscenely gerrymandered like Wisconsin was. Regardless, the Democrats will be favored in part because of a little bit of gerrymandering and also the political geography for Nevada Republicans is really, really bad. Right. I mean, this is how, Democrats were able to win 3 out of 4 districts in Nevada comfortably in the U.S. House, but they lost the popular vote by more than what, Steve Sisolak lost the gubernatorial election by. I think their House Republicans in the U.S. House won that popular vote by like 3 points. And then, also in New Hampshire, both chambers are going to be competitive this year. The New Hampshire Senate will definitely be favored to go to the Republicans. I don't know by how much, but I mean, half the districts went to Biden, half the districts went to Trump. So it's a pretty intense gerrymander for a district that Biden, or for a state that Biden won by 7 points, if I recall correctly. And then also my favorite state, politically speaking, is Alaska. The Alaska House should be pretty competitive. The Alaska Senate is, not really going to be competitive. This is a really unique state to where we don't really know who controls either chamber until after the election because of these coalitions that form. But, when we're creating this forecast, we're going to be looking at the filing deadline after it's out, seeing who's running where, and just using the current caucusing for incumbents and a partisan affiliation to create our forecast. So that should be the most competitive chambers this year. You might have a state like Maine to where there's a little bit of a chance to go to the Republicans, but it won't be obscenely high, and then maybe some others as well.
Yeah, let's take a step back from the presidential race really quick and pivot back over to state legislatures. We're recording this episode on March 13th, and there's plenty of state legislative filing deadlines this week in states like Montana, Oregon, Idaho, Iowa, Nevada, and Maine. Anything in particular on your radar in these states?
Yeah, so, Wisconsin's districts are very, very different. And also Georgia has pretty decently different, not as different as Wisconsin's, but pretty decently different state legislative districts up this year. So that's going to give Democrats double-digit net gain in state house seats right there with the election results that are going to be likely playing out there in Georgia and Wisconsin. And then Ohio also redistricted, and that gets them a couple more seats on the state house level. And then at the state senate level, you have some staggered state senates like in Pennsylvania and Missouri, to where you have some pretty safe Democratic pickups, just 2 seats in total between those states. Then also Nevada also has a safe Democratic pickup that will, be coming this year for the Dems. So, currently, I think the Democrats are going to be picking up seats when we're talking about what seats they're going to be favored. And then also, obviously, I think that this is going to be a bluer year than 2022 was. That was still a Republican-leaning environment. I know that Trump leads the polls right now, but I'm currently in the camp that I think that the most likely scenario, and I do want to note that we are in March, so this is a long way out, but I'm currently in the camp that the most likely scenario at the moment is that if I had to pick, I think Biden loses re-election and Democrats flip back the House. I think that Biden is a unique liability to himself, and that the Dems would have a narrow House majority. And I think state legislative elections are not that far off when it comes to that pattern. In 2016, Trump, he, had a lot of ticket splitting going for the House Republicans. And I think it's going to be the opposite this time. But it's in March. We'll see if that changes. I'm going to be watching the polls to kind of, determine the electoral environment as well when I'm looking ahead and also using fundamentals.
Now, with the major party presidential candidates decided, and we are officially due for Biden-Trump round two, your most recent forecast still has Biden favored both to win the popular vote by a solid margin and, more narrowly, the Electoral College, with a projected 226 votes to Trump's 219. But I believe this forecast is from January, or at least from before Biden's State of the Union a couple weeks ago now. So what's your outlook for the presidential election today? Has it changed at all?
Yeah, so we launched it almost about a year ago. Now, I think it launched in April of last year, actually. And Biden had about a 6 in 10 chance of winning, just above 60%. And now he's got a 53.6% chance of winning. This is not a live model that, uses the current polls and whatnot. This is using my ratings. So kind of like how our classic forecasts work on the state legislative side. We did just update after the Minnesota primaries, so Super Tuesday, because I moved Minnesota from very likely Democratic, representing a 9 in 10 chance of Biden winning, to an 8 in 10 chance, based on the surprisingly high uncommitted result in the Democratic primary there. So that, so this was updated just last week. But, this is pretty much a toss-up race. And I think this is probably going to be a toss-up race throughout the election, unless something happens like Trump is convicted and goes to prison. We'll see if that happens, because I think if that happened, I think that Biden would be almost certain to win re-election, quite frankly. But, that is a hypothetical. And, I don't forecast on hypotheticals. I forecast based on what I know at the moment.
Obviously, the age factor for both candidates might alter your forecasts if one candidate's declined or has to take a step back from the race. But what else are you watching for that might give either candidate the edge?
That's the only thing I can think of. I am trying to look at, especially public opinion on the economy. I'm trying to decide what I think is the best way to measure this. There are a lot of ratings academic ratings that I want to look at, but at best, I get to do half the readings for my classes while running C analysis and doing all sorts of other things while I'm finishing up my undergrad. So, I'll be looking at that after graduation, here in May, when trying to decide, based on academic papers and research, what is the best way at looking at consumer sentiment and public opinion on the economy. I think that the president is in a better position with public standing on economy than he was in 2022. I would say that for certain. Inflation is much more manageable compared to where it was in 2022. But, we'll see what happens. Obviously, if there is a sudden recession or something, that would obviously alter our forecast. But, that, again, is a hypothetical.
So I did my due diligence, as all good interviewers do, and stalked your social media accounts before our conversation. I saw you tweet last week that you think 2024's polling is very likely to be more accurate than what we saw in 2020. What makes you think so?
This is kind of one of debate amongst, academics and pollsters. But I'm in the camp that I think that polling was very off in 2020 because you had a lot of liberal voters who were complying with lockdown procedures and thus more likely to answer the polls than were conservatives. I know that, the polling that was the final averages and whatnot in, right before the election were pretty comparable to that right before the pandemic. But I think that if the pandemic had not happened, then the polls would have been much more accurate. So I do think polling will be more accurate in 2024. I think at worst for pollsters on the state level, it'll be as inaccurate as 2016 was. And I want to note that I just said on the state level, national polling was pretty accurate actually in 2016. And I think a lot of people have memory hold that. It was just that you had pretty decent misses in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, especially Wisconsin, both in 2016 and 2020, that I think people have memory hold 2016 as, oh, the polls were really off that year, when actually they weren't that bad, especially when considering margin of error. So, I think polling will be pretty decent this year. I know that a lot of people thought that in 2020 as well, right after they nailed the 2018 midterms. But again, I think the pandemic really threw polling off.
Yeah, well, let's hope you're right. Chaz, you've been great as always. Great to have you back on the show, and we'll have to do so again before long. Before I let you go, Chaz, I wanted to give you a chance to tell us a little bit about your nonprofit. I know you mentioned that in the lead up to our conversation today, that you might be launching that soon. So what sort of inside scoop can you give to our listeners about what your nonprofit is going to be up to?
Sure. So, this is something I've been working on. I think I got the idea back in 2022. C Analysis has kind of been, when I launched C Analysis, this was not something that I thought would become a career. It was just a place that, okay, I'm gaining a following and I want to post my stuff on a website. And, but at the end of the day, C Analysis in its current format is not going to be sustainable for, an actual job. And I want this to be a job for a lot of our staff, especially me, because I'm the only person in the country that does this work. I'm the only state legislative election forecaster there is now. And so, I looked at the nonprofit model because there are things that I want us to be able to get into. When during my career of almost 7 years of looking at state legislative elections, there isn't anything that exists that is a home for state legislatures and just state legislatures when it comes to the essentials. Promoting participation in state legislative elections, aggregating, creating state legislative news, and then also demonstrating data. So having a publicly accessible, comprehensive bill database, measuring ideology in state legislatures, creating state legislative news, and hiring states that really need state house reporters, looking at also the reporting on elections and a policy that's going on in those states, and then also forecasting state legislatures. So this is going to be something that is going to have a partial launch here pretty soon. Probably before July, I would say, is when we have a website up. And, so C Analysis will be running throughout the year in 2024. And then it will be, its content will be donated to the new group. The name and all sorts of stuff will be announced later. But that content will be donated, the appropriate content, so like the forecast, for example, will be donated to the new nonprofit and its website. This is a level of government that I feel is very much in the dark. And, too many people don't understand their state legislature. This is a level of government that has very little accountability. And, that's something I want to help promote. So this will be something that, will be launching, and more details will be announced publicly later. And, here pretty soon, I'm going to be starting to try and network out to interested donors to help us get off the ground. This isn't going to be fully launching. Again, this is just going to have a partial launch here in a few months. So yeah, I'm really excited about this. Anyone who has set up a nonprofit knows that these things take a long time to set up. And I started laying the groundwork back in May, I believe, when actually trying to look up, okay, who would I want to work with on helping set this thing up? So yeah.
Very exciting stuff and important work you got going on, Chaz. Thanks again, as always. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you. And thanks, for the work you guys do at Ballotpedia. I've been using y'all since high school when I first started doing this in 2017. So y'all are also a very valuable resource.
And let us be the first to wish you a congratulations on graduating. Very exciting time for you.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited. And, I'm very fortunate to have gone to a great school like Virginia Tech and our wonderful political science department program we have here.
Let me get a go Hokies before I let you out of here.
Go Hokies.
And for our listeners, you can learn more about our election coverage at the link in our show notes. We'll be back next week with more On the Ballot. Make sure you subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Frank Festa, and thanks for listening.